City of Buckeye Council Workshop, February 4, 2025. Can we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Younger.
Here.
Councilmember Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Goodman.
President.
Councilmember Hegestad.
Here.
Councilmember Beard.
Here.
Vice Mayor Bustos.
Here.
Mayor Horsford.
President, thank you very much. Item 2A is presentation to council regarding the economic forecast for the City of Buckeye as it relates to the forecast on a national, state, and local level, including the state of Arizona, City of Buckeye, and Phoenix metro area. We have about an hour for this, and we have, are you doing the introduction?
I'll do the introduction.
Okay, Mr. Bilkoff.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members. Jim Rounds, President and CEO from Rounds Consulting Group is here with us today to provide you with an economic update. So I think most of you, maybe except for a couple of new council members, have worked and have just met him before. He's done a lot of projects throughout the state, especially in the valley. I know he's also given many presentations, economic update presentations to the League of Cities, the Government Finance Officers Association. So all of his economic updates have always been very well received, very highly informative. So with that, I'm going to have just Jim kind of go through the presentation. We would like questions, any comments or questions throughout the presentation. Jim will be more than happy to answer the questions. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Jim and let you go with your presentation.
All right, good to see everybody. Overall, still very optimistic about the region, about the state, even different regions throughout the state. There's additional uncertainty coming up. Things could go either way. We can talk about tariffs a little bit as well. There's a lot of issues related with some communities related to the extent that some of the temporary federal surplus or stimulus monies were used on permanent programs versus one time. That seems to be the biggest variable in communities that are going to have some budget issues in the short term, but there's ways around it. You just make adjustments. I think right now, overall, based on what we've seen from the federal government, the answer is we don't know. And what I learned a long time ago, I'm local, I was born here, and I went to ASU for grad and undergrad, and then my first job was at JLBC. And so I did budgeting and forecasting before I worked for economist Elliott Pollock for almost 15 years, and then I started my own firm about 10 years ago. So lots of history with Buckeye in this region as well. But what I learned is that when you're putting together forecasts, there is some public policy and political components as well. It's not just turning in a forecast. The first forecast I turned in, it was a lottery forecast, and I went out to like $300. It was like 351 million, whatever, and $300. And I was given the hardest time. Why would you forecast something out that that level of detail? I said, well, let's have a model kicked out. And I was being all arrogant, and I was put in my place. And I learned very quickly that, well, what happens if you have a legislature or a council or county supervisors that are very, very risk averse? Well, how do you accommodate that? If you want to maintain the same level of confidence, but the level of confidence is very high, you got to lower your forecast. If you're not that risk averse, kind of depending on your fiscal situation, then the forecast could be a little higher. So there's so many unknowns related. I don't think people fully understand the extent, not at the city level, more at the state level. A lot of lawmakers and other leaders throughout the state don't understand how complex it is to put together a budget, understand the finances, accommodate the risk, still have money to help on economic development projects, when you're beaten down, have that very positive attitude even though it's 8 at night and you really don't want to be in that meeting with that person from that business that's been a little rough shopping, their business around the different communities. You still have to be very positive. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that there's a lot that goes into economics and public policy that is more art. And you tend to see the communities that do a good job, they have more artists with their staff and with the leadership than others. The most rigid communities are the ones that seem to be having the most fiscal problems right now. Let me just get into some of the data so I don't bore you too much. I want to cover the national economy first, and again, any question about any of the data points, just interrupt me. State's economy in the budget. I want to talk about budgeting and how policy analysis is going to be affected by it, and why things aren't as dire as some individuals are indicating at the Capitol. And then calculate the benefits of policy proposals, which seems to be the way to get both sides of the aisle, the Republicans and the Democrats, on board with how you evaluate public policy items. Because years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it was whatever book of dogma you were given is how you evaluate a public policy project. We started bringing in business principles, like, okay, what's the positive, is it a positive ROI project? If you end up spending $1 of taxpayer money, but you're going to generate $3 in taxes, where they can either get returned in tax cuts, or it can be used for better services, or a combination of the two. That's how a business would make a decision. But that's how we've been getting through to individuals at the Capitol, and that's why we've seen some progress in Republicans supporting things that typically weren't Republican, and Democrats supporting things that typically weren't Democrat. But we still have problems with basic things like housing bills. Thursday, there's if you're up for it, the Capital Times Morning Scoop is on housing affordability. And one of the questions I was just told that I'm going to be asked is about a tweet that I had not that long ago, where the tweet showed how there's housing price escalation of around almost 40% in all these different countries. And so I tweeted, for shame, League of Cities and all the local cities in Arizona for driving housing prices up on all these countries across the globe. It must all be you doing a bad job. It's amazing what you have to explain down there. League is one of our clients, so we're pretty close with some of those issues, and so we look out for you on those bigger topics when we can. Federal government, you take a look at employment percent change, we're still seeing healthy growth. But I like to look at the one where it evaluates, okay, hold on, let me go back. So the one that you hear about the most in the media, though, is number of new jobs being created. And so you'll hear or you'll read that the U.S. created 200,000 jobs in a particular month. Now, at this point in the business cycle, my threshold for it being good versus bad, and it's a general threshold, is if it's above 200,000, that's generally a good number. If it's below, you want to pay attention to see if it's going to weaken. Different times in the business cycle, the number could be higher or lower, but there's also a lot of confusion over it, because we went through a period where we had 12,000 jobs created in 1 month. Well, are we about to go into a recession? Like, well, no, we had that horrible storm, and we had a couple of big strikes, and then the next month it went right back up to around 270,000 or whatever it was. So you got to be careful with what you look at, and you want to look at 2 or 3 months of a trend. And the other thing is, whenever the numbers come out, they compare it to some forecast. And so if somebody produced a forecast for the jobs and it was 220,000 and we had 200,000, does that mean that the 200,000 number is bad, or does it just mean that the person that produced a $220,000 or job forecast did a bad job? It's the latter. You got to look at the absolute numbers, but in every month that it comes out, the very first line is it outperformed the forecast or it underperformed. Keep in mind, that just means that the forecast was bad. The numbers are the numbers. Leading index, it's starting to slide a little bit, and this has a number of different components to it, but we've been there before. The reason that we don't put as much weight on this one, and also data like unemployment, is that we went through a very unusual recession in the Great Recession. It took us a really long time to recover, many years, just to get the jobs back. And then we had a very unusual recession again, the COVID recession. Things are different now. The stuff that you learn in books and from other economic experts, they don't apply. And that's especially true with some inflation numbers that I'll show you in a minute. These are the 10 components of the leading index, in case somebody wanted to see that. If you wanted it, everybody has access to the PowerPoint if you want to look at it later. The question I get a lot, not this exact question, but it comes to that. Why have we predicted 10 of the last 0 recessions? Over the last 5 years, we're going to have a recession in 3 months, we're going to have a recession in another year. A lot of it had to do with what was happening with federal government activity, and I'll go into that in more detail. So the red represents the extent that we had jobs that were lost, and it took us that long to get back to where we were before, that many months. I call this the pain of a recession. How long does it take just to get back to where you were? So people thought that the COVID recession was going to be like the Great Recession, but maybe twice as bad. So we had significant stimulus programs. That's what the COVID recession ended up looking like. But the programs weren't adjusted for the reality, and we ended up seeing continued federal government spending at fairly high levels. Good or bad, depending on your political position, it just is what it is. And I'll get back to that. So we had this extra spending, a ton of spending. We also had a Federal Reserve Board that, in my opinion, might be one of the worst that we've had in a long time. Kept interest rates too low for too long, raised them too quickly, raised them so fast it actually caused problems with certain banks, which is unacceptable. And then, they're coming back down again. Now, here's the irony, is that this was very inefficient. It shouldn't have followed this pattern. I kind of miss the days where part of the report on what the Fed's going to do was if Greenspan kind of went like this, or scratched his chin, you knew that maybe things were going to be more moderate going forward or whatever. And it became a joke, but it was also reality. Very poor signals were sent. So we had interest rate, it cost nothing to access money. And then we had a 50% increase in the M2 money supply. There was an article that took the peak point and then that trough on the far right, where that's circled, and they said that we just had the biggest decrease in M2 since the Great Depression. We should be panicking about that. That's why you want to look at more than just percentages. You want to look at levels, because that certainly looks like we still have a ways to go to get back to normal. We didn't just reverse policy back to where we would have been during the Great Depression. We still have a lot of extra money out there, but it's being pulled back some. In terms of inflation, we had very high inflation, prices were pushed up. Now, I think I covered this earlier, but just in case, this also had an impact on city budgets because people pay a percentage of the dollar value. So if you have prices that are 30% higher than they were before, you're collecting tax revenue on that. That was something where the sales tax collections were going up at a clip that was beyond what people were forecasting. And now that inflation is getting back to the level that it should have been, it doesn't mean the base is coming down, because you have to have a negative inflation number for the prices to get back down to where they were before. It's now not growing more rapidly, but prices are still very high. Now, it's going to vary in different areas like gas prices and others, but across the board, it's still very expensive for basic goods, groceries, other things like that. So we have to keep that in mind. This contributed to some of your tax collection growth in the past, but you're not going to get the boost, but you're not going to see a loss of the prices come down for a while. So you just have to, the forecast percent growth could be a little bit more modest going forward. Concerns about the national debt, adding $10 trillion over 4 years could be a problem. This is U.S. home median sales prices. Again, getting back to defending that it's not the cities that are driving up prices. There were macroeconomic issues that impacted everybody. So we're seeing this across the nation. The question is, to what extent do individual cities contribute to some of the inflated prices? Well, we calculated for the league that about 85% of the price increases had to do with macro factors that were well beyond Arizona. But we're starting to see more homes delivered The great thing about the league is that they let us just state the facts. And one of the facts was at any given time, we were working on 2 or 3 projects where a city hired us, or a developer hired us because the city was rejecting a multifamily project. And the economic supported that it would be multifamily, so we worked with them on it. We haven't had one of those for a while now. I feel like there has been attempts by the cities to move forward on these issues, and we have made progress. It's just difficult to see because the other 85% has nothing to do with us, and that's not going to be coming down for a while. We also have golden handcuffs on housing, and this is a big deal because right now, with the cost of labor, materials, everything else involved, the only housing that really pencils out would be the more expensive housing. You're not going to see the median price housing built. You're not going to see the lower price. But if you have somebody with a 3% mortgage, just for some perspective, and they wanted to go from a 5% or $500,000 home to $600,000, but a 6% mortgage, you're adding 20% to your home value, but it's costing you 50% more in terms of your home payment. And this is just for a $100,000 increase. When you're dealing with maybe losing $100,000 to $200,000 in wealth just by shifting away from that really favorable mortgage rate that you're probably not going to get anytime soon, you end up with people staying put. That means that the people that would have been purchasing those more expensive homes and creating additional openings at the lower level aren't moving. So the volume of activity is a big deal. When we talk about housing affordability, the main thing that people bring up is, on average, what percent do people spend on housing? And the rule of thumb is you don't want to spend more than about 35%. And this is just something that we had to put together for a client, so I wanted to use 2020 because it wasn't being impacted by the COVID numbers yet. But that's average. For households making less than $50,000, it's 44%. I have another one where households are making less than $40,000, it's in the 50s. So housing affordability is really different depending on the demographic you're looking at. The housing affordability solutions are therefore more complicated than a lot of people are saying. It's not about having a city be less restrictive on, well, if a city has restrictions on, well, we don't like that color scheme, or the pitch of the roof needs to be a little steeper even though we don't have snow here, that can push it a little bit. To some extent, the private sector and the consumers will demand what's built. But in other cases, some issues had to be resolved. But how are we going to deal with this? How as a city can you deal with housing affordability when you get these extreme situations where you just can't build the lower income homes? How do you take care of the workers? It's very challenging, and a lot of this stuff has to be done at the state level. And I don't mean the state getting on the cities, I mean the state trying to come up with some solutions to the housing problem. The state feels like it can, yes sir?
Does this include rentals as well, or just purchase? Home ownership?
Everything.
So rental, the
And-
cost of renting is the same?
And that's gone up a lot too. As somebody that subsidizes a son in college, yeah, it's gone up a lot. So here's where I'm hoping things are going to go, and I'll blow through the rest of this pretty quickly. We can't buy ourselves out of this. We can't just put more money in the housing trust fund and then say we're going to subsidize some additional buildings. We need to get clever. And one of the ideas that we were really hoping somebody would pick up was going to be taking the and this would be for some of the older communities, taking some of those old strip malls that aren't producing much in property tax revenues because they're mostly vacant and there's no more sales tax collections coming in, using that, freezing the current property tax rate and allowing a developer to come in, and that would, the difference between the current property tax and what it would be with multifamily would be the incentive. We wanted to try to do an evaluation of if we did this for all the viable areas, could we take care of maybe half the housing problem just with that, and it would cost the taxpayer nothing. These are the things that I think we have to be more clever about, but unfortunately politics will sometimes get in the way. We do some work for the Board of Regents, and one of our recommendations was up in Flagstaff, where they don't seem to have many housing solutions. NAU wants to have more dorms, and they have room for it. The developer comes in, builds it, and then the developer charges the rent. Well, if we built 10,000 dorms, we're pulling in people from the community and freeing up housing for others. The city didn't like it because they thought it was a way of indirectly getting more students up in Flagstaff, even though we were talking about no money going towards professors or academic programs. It was just purely a housing play. But that would have cost nothing, and we could have freed up thousands of housing units. That's how we have to think. We have to get more clever, but in some cases we have to figure out how can we enable that. And I have a feeling that we're not going to be able to get it through this year, but working on an alternative to TIF related to transportation and housing is something that we started this year. The politics is dictating that we probably have to stall it until the following year, but there are some, the league is taking a lead on at least looking at some of this, and as we get to the summer and the fall, I would love an opportunity to be able to brainstorm with staff here and you all about how would it look if we implemented this alternative to TIF. I jokingly, in the draft paper that I have, I called it revenue conditional growth, RCG. And then somebody said, do you really want your company name to be associated with a tax policy that a lot of your conservative friends are going to hate? And I thought, okay, we'll call it something else, but we can't call it TIF. But there could be an intelligent version of TIF that's going to be coming that we can get through the legislature.
Okay. Before we move off of housing, ask just a question from a macro level, and there's, believe me, no politics one way or another behind it, but just numbers. I don't know how many people have migrated into the United States over the last 4 or 5 years, whatever it is. You ask some of the friends on the left, it's 2.5 million. You ask other people, and it could be 20 million. I don't know what it is. So somewhere between, let's say, 5 and 10 million people may have come into the United States. Clearly, that has to affect housing costs and availability. Is that a fair statement? And do you have any thoughts on we slow that migration in for a time to catch up? Is that a maybe rational thought in the whole housing discussion?
Yeah, it's supply and demand.
Yeah.
Now you might see household size on the lower end, of the price line. It might be 5 people instead of 2.2, or whatever the average is, but that would drive prices up. But going forward, we'd have to see, can we have a more intelligent immigration plan? Like the fact that Yuma 1 year, that area, they couldn't figure out how to get the workers that came across for the day and worked to go back, and all these fields of agriculture fields just decayed, and a lot of farmers went bankrupt. The fact that we can't even figure out how to do that kind of stuff is very frustrating, and I'm hoping that we'll be moving in that direction, because we're going to need the labor, but we're also going to need higher quality labor as well, which I might have an example in here, just something to think about.
Thank you.
Okay, so I always like to say people and businesses need stuff, and that list just gets longer and longer, and can probably, put this on 5 slides. But the question is, how do you pay for the stuff and stay in the black? And a lot of this stuff gets back to what is the state's role in economic development and growth. And one thing that is ignored quite often is when there's a big economic development announcement, the cities are very rarely thanked for, by the way, thanks for being the primary contributor in terms of cost by putting in the infrastructure early or new. So the state still drives some of these activities, even though the cities are, from my perspective, maybe the most important component of economic development. Now, JLBC just had an FAC meeting, which is a Finance Advisory Committee meeting, which is just a bunch of economists guessing what the forecast is going to be. I missed this one. but the dollar amount is still the same. We went from, at the state level, estimating about $1 billion shortfall to having about a $300 million surplus. There was recent controversy because the governor's office had an estimate for the surplus in an out year that was very high compared to what the legislature had. A lot of that had to do with not including some growth in Altex, I think, and it kind of threw the budget out of whack, and there were some staff changes. But budgeting is complicated, and they might have had a point. I don't know if somebody was thrown under the bus or not. But we do have a positive dollar amount here, which is good, which means we can keep economic development programs going forward. There's going to be some lawmaker. One of my priorities that I'm not even getting paid for is I want the land department to get a little extra funding, because we did an analysis and they're about $2 to $2.5 million short on personal services, which is causing them to have the highest turnover among pretty much all the agencies that are general funded. But they have to be better. Huge ROI on that. So can we afford to provide that amount and then a little bit more? Absolutely. But then we're going to say, but wait a second, there's some issues related to the extra costs. What people forget, so what people forget is when we had that income tax cut, we got a call from Tom Belshey in the afternoon asking if we could take on the role of making sure that the cities were held harmless with the revenue distribution percentage. Took it on. 10 minutes later, I got a call from the governor's office saying, can you take the lead on the income tax, the flat tax? And it would have paid so much more, but I just committed, and you got to do the right thing. So I said, I'm sorry, I can't, but we'll be happy to give you advice. We did an analysis after the communications director over there annoyed me a little bit with something he said in the Capital Times, and I was on vacation, so I wrote what we call the Jerry Maguire paper, where I said, here's what you should be doing. That caused enough uproar where we were actually involved in some of the final discussions about what the cut's going to be. Now, they were going to have it at 2.5%, even though we said 3.5%, so that was fun. But we put in some triggering, and we also said, with the lawmakers that were holding out, let's pay off some debt, and let's put an extra $450 million in the state's rainy day fund. That's why there's so much money in the rainy day fund right now. To get through a modest recession, which is all that we're going to probably have if we have one, you need $1 billion. There's $450 million sitting in there, and we've been waiting ourselves to pull the trigger on mass communication on that by just doing an op-ed in the Capital Times and Republic or somewhere where lawmakers can see it. Our concern is that we don't want to use the artificial discussion of we're cash poor to pull back on programs, or maybe pull back on higher ed investment where we need the extra workers, pull back on workforce programs, go after city money and that kind of stuff. So when you hear those discussions and somebody says, we just don't have the money for that $10 million program or whatever, to get to their tax cut, that was part of the deal. And it was to deal with exactly what's happening right now. So what better use? I don't think they should spend all the money, but of the $450 million, maybe spend $100 to make sure that we don't have to cut good economic development programs and maybe even some new stuff in the near term. I had my staff calculate for me just in the files, and I think we were up to like 820 speeches. And I was terrified of public speaking when I came out of school, by the way. But when you do it enough, it doesn't matter anymore. But this is an exact copy of my grandfather's stereo equalizer, and he was an engineer with Motorola, and he was one of the, I like to be under the fluorescent light, smoke my cigarette, draft things, and then go tinker with electronics at home. So engineers usually get 3 pieces of equipment. They get 1 to use, they get 1 for parts, and they get 1 just in case. So we found 3. This got me thinking about how the economy works. Now, this is the old way of adjusting your music, how your music sounds. Now, if you go into your iPhone and you hit EQ, you can add extra bass to your music by just clicking a button. You can make it R&B, you can make it classical, whatever kind of music you listen to, you fine-tune your music. But what it's doing is adjusting these levers up and down. So when we started talking to lawmakers, we thought everybody will understand music. And a lot of them remember that and actually still have the old-fashioned ones where there's like 20 of them. And I said, each of those is a lever in public policy. We want to have the best sound, the best economy from the right public policy. But you can't have the lowest taxes and also the highest investment in these other areas. You have to find the right balance. You have to find the right ROI. You got to look at opportunity costs, and we got through a lot of people. So I love this slide. That's just one of the ways that we're trying to communicate. Job growth in 2024, we jump back up to number 3, which was interesting. Now, there's states on there that you would normally not expect. We actually fell out of the top 20 the prior year, and we were barely in the top 20 the year before that. But that has to do with timing of recovery. So if you fall by 50%, you got to grow by 100% just to get back to where you were before. So you always have to grow by a higher rate than you fall. Now, Arizona recovered earlier, and so we posted the higher rates of growth early, and then we went back to normal rates of growth. And then other states that typically lag Arizona had that mathematical advantage, and they jumped up. So what is Rhode Island doing fantastic on economic development? Nothing. They're just slow to recover. Montana, fairly small. Where is Idaho? Idaho, I usually joke because they're always near the top, and I say they added a Circle K, so they doubled their employment base, and that's why they were number 1. But even they've slipped. So Arizona, because enough time has gone by, the states that were lagging us are now starting to fall in terms of percent, and we're getting back to being top 5 again, but legitimate top 5. So that's good news. This is my favorite public policy story. So we were going through per capita personal income as a percentage of the U.S. is a great measure because you're measuring against yourself, your own performance over time. So it's not like 2 football teams playing, and if one's really good and you're not quite as good, you end up losing. It's a little bit more like golf, maybe. Are you trying to do better than you did last time? It doesn't matter if your buddy's better than you or not. But when we compared ourselves to the U.S., we had multiple decades of decline in per capita personal income. This measures the quality of economic growth. When we went through the Great Recession, even though it was 2008, we troughed in 2011, I think, and then the public policy that was implemented was in 2012. And we worked on some of that with a lot of other people. We adjusted tax rates to be more competitive when they were low out of whack, helped create new economic development programs. That's when the ACA was created instead of the old Department of Commerce. A lot of stuff was done. That's what's happened since then. That's not by accident. Good public policy works. And the value of that going from the star to where we are now is enormous. We're talking about billions of extra revenue, state revenue. This is one of the biggest reasons that we are enjoying such strong revenue. That and then the federal government spending that went to local government entities. So soft landing in Arizona. And I mentioned this before, but a mild recession, which is all we're predicting right now, you need about $1 billion. That's what's in the rainy day fund at the state. That means that the state could get through a mild recession, if that's all that we have, without cutting services and raising taxes. That also means that we still have that extra money set aside for projects that I think are going to generate more revenue than they're going to cost, like the land department issue. We're working on some tourism-related issues. What's another one? Even foster kids, even smaller ones. I call it socioeconomic development, where if we help them have better programs because they're not treated by the state at the quality that they should, for every dollar that we spend, we'll save about 4. I thought we'd get a little bit more interest by the governor's office when we said you can call this that you're going to be the leader of socioeconomic development. A social worker working on economic development. They said, sounds complicated. All right. So in a few speeches, I told the story just out of spite, and then I offered to sell the concept for $100. Obviously, you just take it, but we actually have been trying to be very supportive of the governor's office, know the staff from our experience. Chad's doing the best job he can, but we've been getting more interest on the socioeconomic development programs from the conservatives in the House than we have any other group. Interesting. Why? Because we converted the ROI. they could be a leader in looking out for taxpayers and making government more efficient, and I love that concept. And I don't know why everybody doesn't love the concept. Buckeye, I'm just telling you stuff that you already know. Where's the growth going in your area? The biggest question is, are there going to be any unexpected constraints on the growth? But in looking at your growth numbers, they're still very strong. We still have, there's still a lot of unknown issues related to transportation infrastructure. The whole I-11 issue got bogged down again with that environmental lawsuit. And you probably didn't see my tweet on that, but if you take a look at the pygmy owl in the range, if you have North America and South America, it touches Arizona a little bit, the habitat area, and then it goes all the way down through Mexico, Central America, into South America. The way the U.S. looks at it is what's within our border. So if there's two of them, we have a problem. We have to shut down investment in transportation and other things. That was quite telling. The good news is that some environmental groups we've been able to work with. One in particular, have you heard of the Nature Conservancy? So, Nature Conservancy, when they called me the first time, I thought, I think you got the wrong person. And then they said, no, I think we got the right person. I said, I'm not so sure, because I was picturing it being more like Sierra. And they said, we want to try to do a better job of blending environmental issues with economics. And so we can speak to a broader audience and maybe be more productive. And I thought, brilliant. What do you want? I'll volunteer time to help you. So we tried to get them a grant through the governor's office, and it didn't work, but they're a big supporter of the land department issues. Even though it's going to, if we increase the quality of the land department, their productivity, they'll be selling more land. We'll be developing more land. But it also allows for better planning for, areas that might, be where they might want to have some conservation. It's better to have informed government entities. What I didn't like, that I haven't told anybody, and I won't say the lawmaker, but a lawmaker that should have known better, doesn't like the idea of additional investment in the land department. Why? Because on the agriculture side, the cattle grazers said directly to them that if we have a more efficient land department, then they're going to be more efficiently looking at our leases, and it's probably going to cost us more money. The land department's productivity got so bad that people are trying to say, let's keep it the same because it's costing us less money. Well, we can design something where we can protect the agriculture interests and everybody else by having more certainty, but we can create programs with the extra money that we're saving and generating by having more efficient sales. So again, when there's groups that are opposed to something, sometimes you can offer alternatives, because if you bring in some of those business principles, it works. So advancing the economy, and this is what you all have been doing here over the years, and I think our first project with you probably was a couple of decades ago, so been following everything happening in Buckeye for a long time. But you first have to increase the volume of the current industries. So you're talking about, you need that volume, the base, to just generate enough taxes so you can put in the infrastructure that's needed to then bring in the additional businesses. And so that's when you go after the higher wage businesses within the same industries. And then you get into the new industries, the tangential industries. Whether or not we're going to be able to have more environmental technology type industries. I know that there's been some good and some bad related to economic development in that area, but in the long run, it'll be very positive. And then you want to go for the higher wages and even the new industries. So I picture Buckeye, so it's an upward sloping curve. It's starting, and it's starting to move up. And the question is, can you keep that moving forward? Because that extra revenue that you get as you have the higher wage jobs pays for the government services that residents demand, but it also pays for all the other infrastructure and everything else that's important. So the quality is what's going to change the community and for the better. But you still have to look out for opportunities where you can still get volume because you want the property taxes and the extra, the multiplier effects from the business locations. The history in terms of employment, still strong growth. This was interesting. So median household income comparisons, Buckeye was higher than Maricopa County's average. And I thought that was interesting. And it turns out that if you look at the breakdown, there's a lot of higher income households, disproportionate in the area, but that wouldn't impact the median that much. That would impact the average. So I was surprised, and I had my staff triple check this, and I thought that's a good sign. Now, part of it could also be you have more households, more families, where instead of the single earner household, you have a family, so there's two earners, and that would push it up as well. And I think that kind of fits the profile, which is family-oriented, business-driven, that kind of stuff. It just, you know, for looking at later, why I was interested in seeing where the employment growth was the strongest. Is it in the higher wage industries? Yes and no. Some of these wages, you're going to see upward pressure in terms of the wages going up over time. Right now, the biggest public policy issue in workforce, and we have to figure out a way of communicating this. So I'm working with the education community, and instead of just saying we need another $1 billion in funding, here's how you go after, here's how you make your argument. If you can increase, okay, so you've seen plenty of studies where we're short on workers going forward. We're not going to meet demand. And the argument has been university or getting a technical degree, A or B. It's been binary. The math doesn't work that way. The only way, there's only one way where the math gets close to our supply of workers, even including importing workers, to keep up with our current economic growth rate, is for every level to increase. We need the people that are dropping out of high school to graduate high school. That high school graduate to get that extra degree. That extra degree to get a more advanced degree. We need every level to lift. And that's what drives me crazy when I hear it's A or B. It's, you know, do we want more bachelor's degrees and a bunch of, you know, liberal people coming out of universities versus something else? Well, the biggest growth has been in engineering and some of the other technical areas. But we cannot keep this economic momentum going unless every single component of our workforce improves. The math does not work. And it's hard to get that message to individuals because we have to work on workforce from high school and all the way, you know, through actually post education to have continuing training. I remember though when I was in high school, I wasn't thinking about what am I going to do with my career. It was about my 66 Chevelle and my girlfriend when I was in my first 4 years of college. It was about my Mustang and my girlfriend. I just find it hard to believe that kids that young, especially in high school even, are going to be able to make the decisions that we're asking them to make. I would like to see a shift more towards the parents, because the parents should have a bigger influence over the families and the individuals, educate them better and on the benefits, and then you slowly shift to the students. Now, how we would do that? One of our recommendations was to have an extra guidance counselor. And I said guidance counselor on purpose because people are like, we don't need more guidance counselors. But I wanted the extra guidance counselor to be a workforce development officer that was trained in workforce issues, that would be at conferences that we all attend and could give advice on that stuff, not only to the teachers in the high schools, but others. It was so popular that one of the high schools that we give presentations to the superintendent sometimes, said we would like to do a pilot program and implement that ourselves. We'll find the money. And I said, don't. Because if you find the money, then there's no way that we'll be able to get money for the other districts that can't afford it. We have to have this as a bigger public policy tool. But this is something that would cost very little, probably a 10-to-1 ROI if we had better informed students, not going into as much debt. Dual enrollment, huge ROI. How can we expand it? Well, we just cut revenue, we just cut the program some to help balance the budget that doesn't need to be balanced. So what do? I don't know. Get frustrated. That's what happy hour's for. In terms of educational attainment, Some college, no degree. In Buckeye, 26% share, a little bit lower for Arizona, but need to increase the more advanced degrees. The associate's degree, I think, needs to be broken into that technical component, because the people that are getting the technical degrees that are almost like what an engineer would be doing for work can be making $70,000, $80,000 a year in a very short amount of time, where it might take others a lot longer. But again, I get back to my other point of no matter how we dissect this, we need everybody, every group to advance in terms of academic achievement. I'm probably running way too long because I like to tell stories. Let me see if there's anything else. All right, things to work on in Arizona. I'll end with this one. I'm a big fan of internships and apprenticeships. I'm even trying to create a GCU was interested after we proposed creating a scholarship program there, and then I was talking to CPLC today because I'd like to see more women and minorities have interest in economics and public policy and go down to the Capitol. What I'm trying to do is we have a very small firm, we're held in high regard, but I'd like to maybe create a couple of these and then peer pressure our colleagues that have organizations 10 times bigger than ours to have 10 times as many programs, but I think that we can do some work there. Energy is a big issue. You could have a whole slideshow on that. Tourism, we'll have to see if that tourism investment area thing goes through. State land management, so it's the usual suspects. Water is the one that's been one of the most frustrating ones for me because, all right, last story I promise. I had to give a speech at a conference, and I was told we want to make sure that, and I brought my PowerPoint on a flash drive so they can see it ahead of time. They said, we want to make sure you're not allowed to talk about water. And I wasn't going to, but I had an extra 15 minutes, so I plugged my flash in the computer in the back where the IT guys are, and I added a water slide. I did two, actually, just because I was told don't talk about water, even though it's an economic development issue. And one of my questions was, okay, we've had all these different meetings and articles and discussions about water. Can you tell me what condition would we be in if the 100-year water supply, which was selected because it's a 1 followed by 2 zeros, if it was 95 years, if it was 90, if it was 85? Is there a curve? What if it was 105? And I thought that'd be the very first thing we would look at. Very basic. Where's a breaking point? They don't even adjust the water efficiency properly going forward. They say, well, we adjust it every year. Yeah, but you're restricting development based on 100 years forward, so you're really not accommodating that. And the comments that I got was, that's a good idea. And this was 2 years into some heavy-duty water discussions at the state, and it still hasn't been done. And I'm really trying to decide, do I want to maybe take my staff off a Bang project and us just do the report ourselves and try to figure out what that curve looks like, just to put a little pressure on people to be making better water decisions going forward. So for what it's worth, I understand your pain. And
I'll write you a check.
Yeah, we'll do a GoFundMe right here. I think we'd be in on that.
So this was kind of high level. If you have any questions now, you know, I'm around, but if you come up with some stuff later, if you want to gather them with one individual or just shoot me an email, my email is just my last name, rounds@roundsconsulting.com. If you want to know if we have any extra data on something, because you're looking at something, let me know. I'll provide whatever we have. But you all been a good partner and friend to us, and really enjoyed over the years brainstorming with you and watching the area grow. And I'm still very optimistic about it, and I don't say that about everybody. There's 2 or 3 communities out there that don't like us because we didn't have as favorable reviews. Tucson's the latest, but that's okay.
That's okay, it's Tucson.
Just saying.
All right, well, appreciate all of that. Council, any questions or comments from council?
I have too many to ask at the time remaining, so no.
We can set the Zoom in as well, if you guys are one.
So we're talking about labor earlier, about everybody, we need to increase everything. Are there any programs, is anybody looking at labor participation rates and how to increase that? Because it seems like over the last 20 years, labor participation, lots of people are just dropping out of the
Yeah.
labor market. What, is anything going on in there?
So on labor participation, the biggest concern and opportunity is we have a lot of the boomers that are going to be retiring, and they're highly skilled. You know, high pay, but high pay because, you know, they have all that experience and skill levels. Physicians come to mind. One of the concerns is that if you break it down into individual policy topics, so like with physicians, we have an opportunity to be promoting the state in rural areas disproportionately where there typically isn't enough support on, you know, having a physician nearby. That's where they might retire. In talking to them, everybody else is talking about, we want to partially retire. We don't want to fully retire. We still want to work a couple of days a week. Well, the physicians, especially the surgeons, if they work 2 days a week, they still have to pay the same $150,000 in malpractice insurance as if they work full time. Why is that? That's dumb. So one of our ideas was, let's use tourism to help promote getting some of the physicians to not fully retire. Let's create a $10 million fund that earns interest at the capital that will cover, that would reduce the risk so that they could have more normal levels. We're probably not even going to need to use it, but that's one policy topic. That seems so simple. And ironically, after that meeting, I came around the corner, I was coming around the corner, and one of the leaders of it said, "You hear Rounds just said economic development, we should get involved in malpractice insurance." And I thought, should I not have said that? Is my idea dumb? And I thought about it more and more, and I thought, this isn't dumb. This is something that could help. But we need like 20 of these different ideas. But you're right, we have a lot of different groups. There's a lot of younger people that aren't participating or aren't working that much. I worked almost full-time in high school. I made $3.35 an hour, and that was great because I had the car and the girlfriend I had to pay for. So labor force participation is a big deal, but I feel like on the boomer side and the retirees, that's a real opportunity for us to get some of these mentors, to get some of the higher skilled individuals, but we have to research what's holding them back from maybe staying in the workforce. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I probably should put in a slide for labor force participation and show the statistic because it has gone down.
Thank you.
I know we've only got like 5 minutes left, but I wanted to ask about a couple things. One, you just mentioned tariffs, but didn't say anything about it. I know it looks like we're kind of carrot and stick right now related to tariffs. But how does that drive onshoring? We think that we're really well positioned for several industries, advanced manufacturing, clearly logistics and distribution, and then more as we move along. But do you see really good opportunities for onshoring happening in the near term?
Near term, no. Long term, yes. So let me answer that in 3 quick ways. One is the best explanation I could give about tariffs is when I'll send you the link to the Verizon video where I was asked, what does a tariff war look like? And I said, remember those old, the movies where they show the soldiers on either side of a big clean green field? It's always like mowed and everything, in reality, whatever. And the generals say, go. Well, a tariff war would be each army to start hitting itself over their heads with the sticks. You're penalizing your own individuals because you can't tax the other countries. You tax your local businesses that are importing it. And depending on the industry, between 85 and 95% of the extra tariffs gets passed along to the consumer. So that's going to drive up inflation in certain areas. If inflation goes up too high, then you're going to see the Federal Reserve Board maybe shift from being neutral or even trying to expand the economy, shift to being more constrained, which means housing affordability is going to get worse, and there's all these different dynamics about it. But there seems to be something to it. And for whatever reason, I just am not a big fan of the 2 teams that are in the Super Bowl, so I can't watch ESPN for a 2-week period. So in the mornings, I've been putting on news instead of ESPN. And I've seen multiple commercials from Canada not promoting a product, promoting Canada as a good partner to the U.S. So the threats I thought they were gonna be empty threats, because the other countries should just not have their people get, beating themselves over the head with a stick and not penalizing them. I thought, well, they'll just hang back and, let the American consumers get frustrated with what's happening. It seems to be doing something. So the threat of maybe long-term escalation should be there. So I think it's maybe a third political, but 2/3 it's the economic stuff. Now in the long term though, you're going to see what they want to happen right away. You're going to see more local production of the things. But keep in mind, if we have labor union problems and all these other issues, it's still going to be cheaper to pay the tariffs, but a lot of the businesses have already been diversifying because of issues, political issues with China. We've been trying to get more nearshoring related to bringing some of the businesses to Mexico and doing even more trade. Well, now we have that tariff. So some of the businesses have made some adjustments, so it won't be as bad as it could. But long term, yeah, we could see that, but I would rather it be, let's encourage them to come here rather than penalize the American consumer at a time where, again, you saw that slide on inflation. Unless we have deflation, which it used to be a bad word, but that's the only way to get back down to where prices should be, it's not the best time to be throwing extra costs on the consumer.
And then in the 30 seconds or so left, airport. Maybe.
You said airport?
Yeah, airport, or the Buckeye Airport.
Same next thing.
So I brought this up first time a couple of years ago in talking with some of the developers out here, and we never really had a chance to talk with staff. I think there's a huge opportunity for the Buckeye Airport, and with some of the additional business activity that's going to go out here once we get past some of these weird political hurdles. This is one where I thought could really work. Learned a lot about airport development when we were working with Peoria. They chose to not go forward, but learned about the economics quite a bit, and it confirmed what we were thinking could happen here. And I think you could use that carrot and have some incentives to get some of the development started, and then you'll end up generating extra revenue. So it may have to be something where it's no cost incentives, because otherwise you wouldn't have the businesses at the airport, but use that, figure out a way of incentivizing it some in the short term. But I think it could be huge. And I wasn't asked to say that. I didn't even know I was going to get that question, but I did bring that up when we were doing that film tax credit, saying,
Yeah.
if that, now Goldwater, my friends like Goldwater are suing on it, but there'll be other opportunities too. So I don't know if you guys are working on that, but if you are,
We're considering it, yes. We're trying to go as quick as we can on it, money and time.
yeah. All right, great. I like it.
Good. All right, well, seeing nothing else from council, really, really appreciate the opportunity to have you come and present to us, and maybe we could set this up on a, not like a monthly quotation, but at least once a year. I don't think we've seen the audience in quite a while, maybe even sooner than that. And really appreciate all your help that you provide on PIREVs and economic development agreements and those things. There's a lot of behind the scenes that you're helping us on. It helps us to make good decisions and be good stewards with the public's money and make some really, really impressive things happen here. So thank you for all you do for the city of Buckeye.
Thanks. Keep up the great work, and yeah, let me know when you want to brainstorm.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. Okay, item 2B is presentation and discussion regarding proposed general obligation bonds. We have about an hour to talk about this. Mr. Doug Sandstrom, you are up.
I had to show off my technical skills first. So today we are here to talk about our GEO bonds. in the tax policy. We just heard a little bit about tax policy and infrastructure investment. And we're talking about tax policy associated with the GO bonds and some of the projects that we would be looking at implementing with that. We're going to talk a little bit about those projects, and we're going to focus on the first issuance. As we talked about when we went through the bond election process, we would not be in a position where we'd be able to issue all the debt all at once, nor would we want to issue all the debt all at once, because when we issue the debt, we want to make sure that we're ready with the projects to get going and start on them right away so that it's in a timely manner. I'm going to talk on the bond side of things, and then I'll turn it over to Riley, who will go into the infrastructure and the projects that we're talking about. So just a refresher real quick. As you all know, we had a bond election back in November. 2 questions on it: public safety for $137 million, transportation and streets for $145 million. Both of those questions passed, 63% and 65% in favor. And when you look at every single district, they passed in each district. So they had a yes vote across the board in the 60s in every district and throughout the city. So the community is very supportive of the infrastructure investment, understanding that there is a cost to them. That's the tax rate that we'll be talking about. Any GO bonds that we issue are paid for utilizing secondary property tax. Currently, the city only has a primary property tax. So with the issuance of GO bond debt, we would be adopting a secondary property tax that is 100% dedicated to pay for the general obligation bond. What we're going to be looking at tonight is going to be based on what was discussed during the bond issue, where it's and what was presented to the voters of a program where we issue debt and maintain a total tax rate of $2.25. So we would issue debt, get up to that $2.25 tax rate, and then maintain that $2.25 tax rate, only issuing additional debt if we can maintain that $2.25 tax rate. The way we are able to do that is through the growth of the city. We just heard that the forecast for us is possibly a slow recession, but coming right back into it, you're going to see a lot of growth in here on where we are positioned in the city. All of our plans on the debt have been utilizing this extremely conservative growth model, where for the first 10 years, we use the first 5 years, we use our 10-year average growth. So that our assessed valuation, which is what our property tax rate goes against, will increase by 12% a year for that first 5 years. After that, it'll increase by 2.5%. That's virtually no growth in the state of Arizona. So everything that we're presenting would be able to live within this very conservative model. However, what we will more likely to see is growth rates of that 10, 12+% every year for the foreseeable future. So what that means is that what we are proposing for our bond program is conservative and it's affordable. When we look at this first bond issuance, that's what we would be committing to. The second one, the timing of that will be dependent upon what actual growth happens within the city. How the bond program would work with the $2.25 tax rate is we would capitalize on that growth. The black line shows what our forecasted primary property tax is. The $1.6513 that you see, that's what our tax rate was in fiscal year 24. In the current fiscal year, it's $1.60. That's because our assessed valuation went up. We're at the maximum allowable primary property tax. So every year that our assessed valuation grows up, the primary property tax rate will go down. What we would be doing with the bond issue is levying a rate of $2.25. So every year when the primary rate drops, the secondary rate will increase by a like amount. What that means in the bond issuance is in this first year, it's about 65 cents for secondary debt service. By the end of this 30-year projection, it would be $1.37 of our rate that would be going to secondary property tax. So that primary will always go down. The rate will be $2.25. If growth happens quicker, that means we'd be able to accelerate when we issue the next debt on this. So what we are looking at is issuing a $75 million bond that would live within that $2.25 tax rate. If that had been done the current fiscal year, it would have been at a rate of $1.60 and 65. We're going to find out this week or next week what our actual assessed valuation is. So at that point in time next week, we will know what the actual numbers would be for fiscal year 26. Yes, sir.
So just for clarification, we're going to issue or hope to issue $75 million in bonds in this first tranche, right?
Correct.
So the debt service that we're passing on to the residents is on the $75 million. It's not on the 280 some million total.
Correct.
So is that 150 annual cost, is that on the total value of the bond program, or is it on that 75 million?
That is on the 75 million and what the increase in that tax rate would be for this current fiscal year. So the difference between what they would pay with the primary property tax rate of $1.60 and what they would pay with that $2.25 rate. Each year that $115 is going to change because more of the money will shift over to primary that would have been from primary to secondary, but that will stay consistent from that point forward. So what people will see is probably an overall increase of, I think it's 5% assessed value increase limit that any one person would be able to see year to year. So that 115 would increase by about 5% every year.
Okay, thank you.
And that is inclusive of future debt issuances as well, because that rate would stay the same. So the median home value in Buckeye is $176,000. We spent a lot of time during the bond process educating people on the difference between market value and assessed valuation. What it really means is that for every $100,000 of assessed valuation your home is, it's about $65 a year. $300,000 assessed valuation house would be 3 times 65, about $180. As I stated, what we would be looking at is issuing a $75 million bond this fiscal year with debt service starting next fiscal year. That would allow us to get started on projects as soon as possible. One of the things we talked about at the bond issue was we wanted the voters to see it, hear it, understand it, vote for it, and then as soon as possible start seeing actual projects coming out of the ground. Which we're gonna, the debt that we're talking about here, the $75 million, it's easily done within the $2.25 rate and gives us that flexibility to issue secondary debt, the second issue either in 2029 or sooner if growth happens quicker, and if something unforeseen happens and the economy were to just crash, that $75 million would still be able to be supported within that $2.25 rate. It is also a dollar amount that is focused on our ability to spend it. We didn't want to go out and issue more debt than what we needed to do the projects that you will be hearing about.
Question, please.
Yes, sir.
The slide before this, when you're decreasing the one side, and then you're going to come in and put $1 or $2, how much are you putting on the secondary? You're going to decrease the primary by.
So in this example right here, it's for fiscal year, the current fiscal year, the rate is $1.60, and a total rate would be $2.25, so it would be $1.60 in primary, secondary would be $65. When we get the new assessed valuations, if that primary drops down to $1.55, then the secondary would be 70 cents.
Quick question, what is the percentage on that? I'm looking at something like 40%.
That sounds about right.
So we've got to tell the residents that our taxes just went up by 40% on property tax?
That, under this program, it would be a 40% increase on the total tax rate. It'd be a 100% increase on the secondary tax rate.
Sure.
And it's all about that investment in the infrastructure and why we went out to the people and specifically had this model in the publicity pamphlet, and we went out and talked so that people were aware of what it is that they were voting for.
But if my taxes last year were, what, give me an average, would that be 40% of that is going to be my increase? if my taxes last year were $115, wouldn't it be 40% of that?
For example, on this median home here of just under a $200,000 home, if your home was assessed valuation of $200,000, last year your property taxes would have been that $320, the $1.60 times the 200,000. Next year, it would go up by the 65 on the two different ones, so $120 is what you would see. So it would go from 160, it would go from 320 up to $120 more than that.
40%.
Correct, 40%.
So I'm telling a resident that their property tax overall for the city is going up 40%.
Correct.
Also, the voters within the city said that was okay. They knew these numbers going in, and 63% of the voters said, yes, I'm okay with this. So we don't have to go back and tell them anything, other than these are the projects that
They're going to be asking,
that money.
I'm not going to go out and broadcast it, but they're going to be asking, when they see their taxes go up by that rate, that, you know, I wasn't told this fact. I was told that it's going to go up a maximum to 225.
And that's exactly what we're saying, and that's exactly what we told them when we
I don't know
broadcast this.
whether they're going to look at it that way or not.
Doug,
Yes, sir.
curious about that comment. The property tax bill is not going to increase by 40%. It's just the city's
Just
portion.
the cities.
Just the city's
Yeah, just the
portion,
city's
correct.
portion.
And what percentage of that is the city's portion of an overall property tax?
We're probably about 12% of the total. And the one thing, when people's tax rates change, that's definitely something that people notice change. And that's one of the things that was a factor in developing this program of the 225, of having that constant rate. So even though it's at 40% change that first year, after that it's a flat rate, and that's what people would expect to see from that point forward.
Well, utilizing your comment of people notice change is even more important to get it going so that they see the changes that might be going to things too.
Yeah.
So,
That's why Riley's here.
That is exactly why Riley is here. So what Riley's going to be focusing is that $75 million and the projects that are associated with that. All of those are done within that rate. It's flexibility, it's our ability to spend, and it's the idea that we would be able to issue the debt and people would see immediate activity. So there are projects in here that means in the next couple of months we'd be able to have construction underway. Other ones that are going to be designed where it's 3 to 6 months construction's underway, and other ones that are teeing them up for that second tranche of bond issue as well. So it's going to be focused on ongoing visible construction happening throughout the city. And with that, before I turn it over to the candidates that you're looking at, and these are the ones that we were talking about, you can see that there's some that are in here that are design and construction, some are that just design, and then some are that are just straight up, we're going to start doing some reconstruction. Riley will talk specifically about some of the pinch point removal projects and the street reconstruction projects to see what those are. And what we'd be looking from the council is just some discussion on those and your thoughts on those projects and any that we've missed or you would like to see. So with that, I will turn it over to Riley, unless you have some more questions on the tax rate at this time, which we will come back to at the end.
So just as a clarification is that our primary property tax rate decreases, the secondary property tax is going to increase to a summative value of $2.25. So on that secondary property tax, we're using that to retire the debt faster, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So.
Or issue more.
Or issue more.
Or issue more,
Correct.
Right now, we're looking at either one of those things.
Correct. We would be looking at a $75 million issue, and we would plan the debt service so that for the first couple of years, it will easily match the $2.25 We'll build up a very small reserve and then be able to, based on the growth, be able to determine whether in year 3, 4, we're going to issue more debt, or we're just going to start letting the rate drop and pay down the debt at that point in time. The rate can only be set at an amount to equal the debt service. So when we set the debt service to drop in year 3, if we don't issue more debt, the tax rate does drop at that point in time.
Thank you. I'll move to my next question. Sorry, Riley.
No, it's all right. Appreciate the questions. Very good. And one of the things before we kind of get started on each project, I kind of wanted to do a quick summary of how we got here and the bond projects and kind of how it fits in the CIP process. So as part of the citizens voting yes on the 2 public safety and transportation questions in the bond, there was a process of looking at basically, there was about $300 million of bond funding here that we have before us, but about double that is what the committee looked at to whittle it down. And then in conjunction and as part of the normal CIP process, outside of these projects, we are looking at a couple $100 million more of that in request. And so what you have before you today is kind of the top priority as discussed from a variety of different people. Yes.
Just to add something to predate that, there was a citizen committee that actually looked at, I think it was $500 million worth of projects, right, plus or minus. They met weekly for between January and April, looked at these projects, identified which projects had priority, and that's how we came to the list that we have now. They were originally presented with 3 questions. They made a recommendation to council on 3 questions, and council modified that recommendation to the 2 questions we have here, and the projects fell out from that. So I just wanted to bring it and remind everybody that this list that was generated was identified by the same voters that approved the bond. So.
And you'll see this is the dollar breakdown of the first issuance, as Doug talked about. The goal as we selected these projects and which stages that we are requesting to fund with this $75 million is one, to show progress, right? We have street reconstruction, we have large pinch point projects that we have some work that we've done. We'd like to show the public, your bond dollars hard at work as soon as we possibly can. Similarly, we're also trying to get after the larger, kind of more complicated, longer range projects. You'll see some of the bigger transportation projects and some of the larger public safety projects. There are 4 public safety projects. We've got 2 project specifics in transportation, and then we've got 2 buckets of money for pinch point removal and for street reconstruction. And we have 6 projects in street reconstruction and 6 projects in pinch point removal and 3 in street reconstruction we'll be going through today. And one of the things I wanted to highlight here as we look at essentially an eye chart of a schedule is we're trying to get after as soon as possible the projects. And so the first 3 pinch point removal projects, we've got Watson, East Half, Apache, West Half, and Verado Way are 3 projects that we've already had some work on previously. And so our goal here is to get dirt moving as fast as we possibly can. The remainder of the projects you'll see on here have a version of design concept report, have a version of design, land, other needs before the public truly sees work being done. So those first 3 are projects we have done, a good amount of work on and are closer towards construction, and then the remainder we have quite some work left to do. Okay. As we transition to the public safety projects, we have 2 fire stations, we have a public safety headquarters, and then we have a training facilities bucket of projects which we have a DCR kind of to annotate exactly what those projects are going to be. The first fire station we want to talk about is coined the West Park Fire Station 706. This is a part of the land we are acquiring as part of a contribution for the Copper Falls CMP. Is an ongoing process, and we are anticipating funding the design, the land, and the construction of that fire station. Right now, it's located west of Miller and south of Broadway. As we transition to the second fire station, this is another land parcel that was dedicated by DMB. It's an 1.5 acres, just north of Indian School and on the other side of Acacia. This is, we have allocated design and construction dollars here. Due to the proximity or closeness of the site, we anticipate this being a 2-story station. As we go forth with the design process, we're doing this in conjunction with a template design of sorts. So we look at kind of the best practices of how fire stations are built in Buckeye, how we've done them, and then similarly throughout the valley and elsewhere. And we anticipate utilizing that as a basis for design. The public safety headquarters, we are intending to fund everything up to the construction as part of the first issuance. It's a complex project. We anticipate a design concept report and then design dollars and land dollars associated in the subsequent years based off of that design concept report. This project is similar to the training facilities, which we'll see after this, in that the DCR, our goal is to uncover where we are putting this facility, right? There's a large, there's pros and cons to different locations and to how this gets done. And so we're anticipating that process to give us a little bit more clarity because this is quite a large project. Similarly, the training facilities, we're anticipating the first issuance to be, again, a design concept report and then land and further design within this issuance. We anticipate, based off of what that uncovers, this would be a strong candidate in FY29 for construction issuance. Again, there's pros and cons to essentially the training track, the tower, and the range, the predominant 3 components of the scope of this project, and where we would place these. Are these all in one site? Are these in multiple sites? Where those sites are? How do we team? And so those are the things we're looking at over the next couple of, throughout this next year. As we transition to transportation, any questions on public safety?
Question related to just the cost of fire stations. It used to be that we would talk, look at the chief, just a few years back it was $4 or $6 million for fire station. That's probably been many, many years back, but it wasn't long ago when that's what we were budgeting for it. And now we just finished 707. I think it was a $16 million bill all in, if I remember correctly. And we're budgeting 14 plus for these next 2. Are there VE opportunities that we can look at, especially I'm thinking the West Park is a set alone. That probably acts as one of those other models that are out there that are a larger station with the several bays, the police offices. But the Victory one, I can appreciate going up, getting vertical, and then using the land that we have maybe more efficiently. Are there opportunities to VE out some of the additional space that we have a couple miles away in the Verado station? And maybe G.
You want me to take it?
When I say
talk about part of it, absolutely.
When I say VE, I'm talking value engineer.
So right now, if we think back in time to that station is the same footprint as 704 in Festival, 705 in Tartesso. Same footprint that we just have in 707. Very small modifications. And I believe, if we go back in time, 705 was a $4.9 million station, but essentially the same footprint. Very, very little additions. And then, so 3.5 years ago, that started design a little before I got here. And so, again, concept-wise, so I think you see the changes, the increases in construction costs and those type of things. The other thing that we're doing right now with Riley's team and some of the project managers is we're looking at that prototype design and looking at and seeing, we started a CMAR process on this after the design was done to see where we could value engineer some things. So by going back now, that prototype design, which was done in 2008, we can update that. We can look at some hallway widths. We can look at roof lines. We can look at some of those and what functions go in what part of the city. Because you're 100% right. Certain things such as a police substation in, I like how Chief will get on me for kicking him out of the station, but he may not need a police substation in Victory or in West Park, but he may. We may not need a classroom or meeting room in West Park. So I think some of those things, but right now, using that prototype to get ahead of that, look at updating that with technology and other things. That's a 15-year-old, 16-year-old design. So I think we have some opportunities and bringing in the team from Public Works, from project managers, and get more eyes on that to where we are doing a little bit different look at our stations instead of that way that we've done. So we are in process and well aware of the concerns with stations, the cost, and I'm there with everybody else. Lots of discussions with Doug and Riley and even Jim. So same concept.
So we're just talking land, or just talking construction. 300% increase in construction costs alone between 3 years ago and now.
Correct.
Well, it's all in, right?
You're talking, I guess, which station are you
Well, I
referring
think
to?
you just used the number
705,
4.9.
4.9, yeah.
And that was
That's-
just construction.
I assume, yes, that's the number I've always been told.
And this is just construction, and it's 16 or 17 million. For
Well,
the same building, really.
We're anticipating construction for this to be in the 14 million range for both of these.
Okay, so still 250%.
Right. And to Mayor's point, we had about a $16 million all-in station that we just cut the ribbon on this last Saturday, right? I think there's some opportunities to value engineer. We're going through that station. We're, tearing it apart for lack of a better term and saying, hey, look, we could have done this a little bit differently. We could have done this a little bit differently. Not that that's not a great station. However, there's lessons learned that we can do in any process. And then taking a look at that template design for, it hadn't been updated since 2008, right? That's a platform that we want to leverage, not just internally, but then externally, kind of separate from this conversation as we look at other developers so that they build the station that we want as well. So that will also have a secondary use for that study.
Yeah, and all of that is not any knock on fire stations that we built. It's just one of the realities of construction costs have gotten so high across the board on everything. I've even asked ADOT, from a MAG perspective, can we look at maybe ways to value engineer roadway projects or freeway projects so that, if you don't need the extra gingerbread, maybe we keep that off of it. If we can do with a tighter right-of-way, maybe we consider that. But the things we've always done, even though infrastructure and buildings and such have always been expensive, they are just, as Councilman Hagestead is saying right now, have gone up so much, such a high percentage. It's probably time to look at all that. And I don't want to dumb down a fire station. It has to be absolutely useful. But maybe there's just creative ways to do other things.
I think we hear in those discussions, we've had several of those. I think you'll see a different product,
Yeah.
similar but different.
Well, I think too, it's important to note that it's construction costs and not finishes that are really driving the cost up. It's around the function of the facility.
It's all of it. Yeah.
But it's not just finishes that are driving that.
No.
We're not building gold-plated fire stations.
No.
Sure.
And then for
Maybe the product.
Yeah.
And you heard that what we would be building at in Victory is a 2-story, the other one would be a single story. We've got the same dollar amount in for both of those, and that's just for sake of setting the money aside. So what actually comes forward is going to be different, and this is just peeling away that piece of the 75 million.
And certainly feel free to, we can readdress public safety. We'll transition into the streets and transportation projects here. As this list was generated, as Councilmember Goodwin was talking about, you'll see big names here that essentially, if you look at Watson, if you look at Verado, if you look at Jackrabbit, we are essentially anticipating to extend, take where those right-of-ways left off and extend them either further south or further north accordingly, right? So we took a look at the analysis of our needs, our pinch points right now, projected into the future, and this is the list of projects we looked at. The very first project is actually Indian School from Jackrabbit to Perryville. This is the only real road project, street project that was its own project. It's a top project for the city because of that, and has huge traffic challenges. What we're proposing here is to ultimately construct the ultimate right-of-way, which is a principal arterial. And in this first issuance, we're proposing the design concept report, the design, and to start the land acquisition process for this project. It's a very lengthy, very challenging project, but we do want to start that project here with the DCR design in the first land acquisition.
Can I just, same conversation about the roadways. I think what would be fantastic is to make these funds go as far as we possibly can. And so on a roadway like an Indian School, especially in this area, you have county properties on one side, and actually you've got, as you get closer to Perryville, you've got a irrigation ditch to contend with, but the back of homes that are not facing or not going to be accessing off of Indian School. And what's in my mind is just lane miles to relieve the traffic pinch points that we have out there, and that probably goes for the Jackrabbit Trail from Thomas to Indian School as well. And not from, this is just Eric's perspective as we're talking through this, and welcome my council members, colleagues to jump in, but it's just trying to relieve those pinch points, and it's not about building the full width landscape, sidewalk, landscape parkway, curb, all of the paving, and the same thing on the other side. If we can skinny up that design and VE that, and especially that portion that if you look at the Indian School from this picture is looking toward the east. When you get to that half mile roadway east toward Perryville on the south side of the road, there's probably not a lot of point in putting sidewalk and enhanced landscaping and things like that on that side today. Someday, Goodyear will have something built over east on Perryville, but the big thing is lane miles and relieving the congestion.
And I think we'll use the DCR to articulate exactly that, right? What are the limits of the improvement we're trying to propose? And then similarly, what's the cost estimate associated with that, right? Do we have the bandwidth, do we have the ability to do that? And then similarly, based off of escalation factors, should we propose to do this in FY29? Is this a candidate maybe for the third issuance of bond, right? I think we'll look at kind of all those things in the DCR process.
Yeah, great.
Very good consideration. The next proposed project, this is the first in the bucket of 6 pinch point projects, and the proposition here is essentially to extend Watson further south. In this case, it's on the east half from Durango down to Lower Buckeye. This project has a design that was started a number of years back, and essentially we are proposing to dust that design off and allocate construction money for construction there. I will say we are currently working through some drainage considerations, and for that purpose I think we'll probably target this fall to start construction as we work towards some of those obstacles to get the construction right away. The second pinch point removal project is Apache, the west half, from Watkins to Yuma. Again, this is another project where the design was previously started and shelved a number of years back, And we're proposing essentially for, as this is a high trafficked area, to improve the west half. This is another project we're working to finalize the drainage considerations to a lesser extent. And this is adding the ultimate along the west half for the driving miles, or for the lane focus to Mayor's point here. As we move to Yuma and Verado, this is another project where we're actually proposing two components to fully alleviate the pinch point. One is actually at the intersection of Yuma and Verado. This is the bond component. The second non-bonded component, which you'll kind of see starred here using general funds, is the increasing the roadway of Verado Way from Yuma to Van Buren by 2 lanes, so 1 lane in each direction. We are proposing to build, design, and build the ultimate intersection at Yuma and Verado. When these plans were shelved a year and change ago, we've had some changes in developers. So the good news is we've had some developers come in on the southeast and the southwest corner that will help, one and two, provide some contributions to that ultimate construction. But however, that will require a little bit of redesign as we get there. I would target, because we need to raise this intersection for drainage considerations and the school to the south, I would anticipate the propensity of the intersection work to be started by next summer.
So we're dusting off an old design, even though we're talking already about a new design?
Yes, so the old design on the intersection, it does not, since that design was finished, was for the interim essentially. And so we're proposing after, since that design was finished, the developers in the southeast and southwest corners came in, rendering us, we have to basically refresh the southeast and southwest corners of that design.
So I'm talking about the travel lane to the north. We were talking about this specific area plan having a better, different design, so we're just gonna build it wider and then tear it out later? Is that what we're talking about?
I guess if I understand your question correctly, for the specific area plan, we are proposing to add 1 lane in either direction between the two, between Yuma and Van Buren. And that would be to design, buy the land, and construct. We're proposing that as a general fund component of the project. And then the bond funded is the actual intersection of Verado and Yuma. And so the goal is to fully alleviate the pinch point along Verado Way, is to address both the intersection and the roadway further north.
If I can, I think what you're referring to is the landing plan shows a couple of different options there. And so, I don't know if Brian's paying attention, I see his head going, but I was gonna look at him to try to talk about how those concepts for Verado Way between Yuma and Van Buren being, kind of going around. If we're contemplating widening Verado Way, what's the timeline of what that design feedback will be from the plan,
Actually, this spring in summer, so it should inform that, the options that were presented to council at a workshop.
But no, we would not go improve a roadway and then immediately tear it
That's
out.
what okay, just making sure that we're not just widening it for an interim and have an ultimate use to tear it all back out and do it again. That just seems frivolous.
And part of what we would do as this process is recommend a design concept report funding to look at that, certainly.
And just add one anecdote, the intersections largely won't change. What's happening in the middle of the mile, the intersections, we still have the same functional east-west and south intersections for the most part.
But I guess we could pick apart each one of these. The difficulty in that is we don't know a timing on a developer for the desal, but when state land would bring that to market. So I don't know that we would hold up relief from pinch point waiting on that to come to market, because it could be 5 to 10 years before that area happens. But obviously, if it goes to market quick and then you have somebody that is before fiscal year 26 ready to give you up on it, that changes things. But I would, same thing, lane miles is what we need, and really the pinpoint.
This is, the roadway is just scabbing on asphalt, essentially. There's no curb gutter sidewalk component for, in consideration of not getting too far ahead of our skis for what that ultimate for descent is. Good questions, appreciate that. Miller Road, this is essentially starting at the end of our current Miller Road project that ends at Lower Buckeye. The goal here is to add 2 lanes, one in either direction, starting from Lower Buckeye all the way down to Broadway. We are proposing to fund the design in this issue, and then the land and construction as contention in the FY29 or second issue. And again, this is just lane miles here.
Just design of lane miles.
That's correct. Next project is Watson, the full arterial from the canal all the way down to RID, proposing to design and procure the land necessary for that, and then the construction would be a contender for FY29, or a second issuance of bond funds. And the final pinch point removal project is actually starting at where we are proposing to finish the current Jackrabbit project. We have a project we're currently finishing up design and should be starting construction here shortly, starting at McDowell all the way up to Thomas, proposing to start with that finished at Thomas all the way up to Indian School. As part of this, the design would be funded in this first issuance, and then the land and construction would compete for the second issuance funds targeting FY29.
Why such a big difference in price from Miller to Jackrabbit whenever the lane miles are more?
It's a good question. The development here, it has to do with what parcels have been developed and not developed in terms of what we would have to add. But it is also based off of a percentage of construction cost as well. And so the construction cost projected here is roughly 11 million, and then for Miller, it's roughly double that.
Willard is doing the phone a friend
Oh,
right now.
Miller has the RID bridge, so you have some coordination with RID as part of the design, and some additional design costs for the RID bridge, and a fee we have to pay them. That's why the fee's a little higher on the Miller project.
Yeah, but don't we have to design for that massive drainage on the west side of Jackrabbit too?
No, the drainage channel's there, we're not touching it.
The drainage is the drainage, and we're gonna stay
Not touching it.
completely off of
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
Question.
The RD's there's that much design in just that bridge?
Then we have to pay them to design it, yes. And then we have to pay them a fee to do their design. It's a fun exercise.
It's very expensive. Good question. All right. Next project is Sun Valley Parkway lighting. When this project went for the bond, it was broken out into 2 components, the Tartesso and the festival component. Due to the proximity to I-10, as part of this first issuance, the design and the construction closest to Tartesso is recommended to design and construct here. It's an exercise in median lighting, roughly in front of the Tartesso development. The festival component would be contended for FY29 or the second issuance. The next 3 projects are street reconstruction projects. These are public works driven projects executed by that team. This project we have in front of us is predominantly for the pavers that are in the north of Sun Valley in the festival area. The pavers are in really bad condition and affecting the performance of the road, proposing to repair and replace those. Similarly, southern eastbound, close to the Ross warehouse. This is essentially an asphalt and restriping exercise. It's in bad repair. We look at the pavement performance index. It's not in great condition, so repairing the asphalt and then restriping is a proposition. And the final project is basically along the airports, south of I-10, along Palo Verde, and predominantly the work here is going to be striping work. There is some asphalt repair as well. With that, that actually brings us to the end of our projects. If there's any further questions on transportation and public safety, tax.
Anything from council? Vice Mayor.
Just one, Ross over there, numerous times I called in where they were tearing up that street out there, and I don't know what would happen with construction trucks and everything else. But will they take any part of the repair of the damages they created out there on Southern? And they had rocks out there, they had dirt out there, they had everything else out there. And I know several times I contacted the city to get them to clean some of the street up at least, because they were tearing the heck out of that street up there. Can they be held for any of that? Or are we getting enough from them with other development fees that cover that?
Right.
Front on that one.
Yeah, Councilmember, when we accept public infrastructure from a developer, there's a warranty period. So our inspectors pull back out, make sure any damage that was done by contractors or subcontractors is fixed and repaired. And any sections that would need to be replaced are replaced at their cost in that warranty period.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council questions? Just a couple things. One, thank you for proceeding on this, and I would say go as fast as we can. I don't think I know what our residents want to see is the projects coming out of the ground. So the monies that they're going to be paying in to repay these bonds has to come with some benefit to it. And so the quicker we can go and provide the relief at the pinch points, or new fire stations, or new service, upgraded service, I think is incredibly important. The areas, a lot of these areas are along existing residential that are either in the county or just were not developed, and maybe are part of Buckeye. There are significant swaths of property that we're going to be going past that that are slated for development at some point in the future. And I want to be super, super clear and make sure that we have a very, very good plan as to how we get repayment for the infrastructure that we're putting in front of the developments that are coming in the future after the improvements that we put in. So if you look at Indian School Road between the church and the this would be east of Jackrabbit, between the church and the canal. All that property is slated for development. I think it's Empire Development. That's an example of an area where they absolutely have the requirement to provide the right-of-way and building infrastructure. And every single one of these projects that we're going out to do, we need to make sure that we have a rock-solid way to get repayment out of that landowner or that developer when they come in to develop. And then, again, world according to Eric, we're just either recycling that money or paying off the debt and able to go on and do different things. So do we have a plan in place for that?
Yes, that's exactly what our plan is that the project's done, once we've got it costed out, any area that has a developer responsibility, we'd have a repayment in place and actually record it against the property so that we know that it's going to get done.
Okay.
Does that have a time frame in sunset? Like if they don't develop within
There is
X
a
number of years?
there is a time frame. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's 10 to 15 years, so it's quite a substantial.
So it's a scale issue.
Yeah. Correct. That's just basically, that's what I was based. does it have a diminishing amount, or is it a set amount for?
Set
the
them off
10
for
period?
that time and then it goes.
Okay. It's not a reduce every year that goes forward.
And it's not exactly a scallop street, I don't think, because we're limited to how much we can be repaid on those scallop streets. This is an agreement with the developer. So in the case of that, I don't know the total distance. I think that scallop streets were limited to 1,200 feet or whatever that number is off the corner. I want to make sure that they're paying for every nickel that they would be obligated to install.
That they would have been obligated on
That they
that
would
day
have.
of construction.
Correct, yeah, correct. Yes.
We'll look at that.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, with nothing else, thank you. It sounds like you
Just
have
one more
something
thing,
to wrap
is just about the timing on this. So what we can anticipate, what council can anticipate is sometime in March, you will be seeing March, April, council action for issuing bonds and setting up some of these projects. As you saw, some of them actually have construction in the current fiscal year. So it's March, April timeframe, you would see that. And then we would issue the debt, and then the tax rate would come before council in June at that 225 for implementation in fiscal year 2026. But the idea is the debt is issued this fiscal year, and we get some of these projects started.
Awesome.
When do we see the renderings for the signs? Bond project, bond dollars at work, future bond project?
We have, for the signs, we've got that, and we can share that with council.
We're gonna have them on a trailer, and we'll just drive up from job site to job site. Light it, that's good. Okay, great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item number 3, with nothing else on this agenda, we are adjourned. Thank you.